Today, we're diving into a true unicorn of the video game industry. Picture this. It's the mid-1990s, and the entire gaming world is absolutely obsessed with the future. Everyone is chasing 3D polygons, drooling over new consoles like the PlayStation, and basically leaving the past behind. But over in Osaka, a small, ridiculously dedicated team of arcade veterans decided to go the opposite route. They looked backwards. And in doing so, they created a timeless 2D masterpiece that actually outlived the very 3D trend that was supposed to replace it. Let's get right into the absolutely fascinating history of Metal Slug, Super Vehicle 001. I think this brilliantly captures the whole mindset of the era. This is a quote from Takushi Hiyamuta, the game's sound director and composer, who went by the nickname Hiya. He said, "You have to give the player everything you've got right from the start." And honestly, in the 90s arcade scene, you kinda had to. You literally had just a few minutes from the second a queen dropped to convince someone to keep playing. The stakes were incredibly high, the competition was brutal, and there was absolutely zero room for a slow burn. You just had to grab them instantly. So to understand how they pulled off this magic trick, here's our roadmap. 1. Rising from Irem's ashes. 2. The failed tank prototype. 3. Run, gun, and survive. 4. Masters of pixel art. And finally, 5. A lasting 2D legacy. All right, kicking things off with Chapter 1, Rising from Irem's Ashes, looking at the fall of an arcade titan and the birth of a brand new studio called Nazca. What's really wild here is just how fast everything went down. In March 1994, Irem, a legendary studio known for classics like R-Type, effectively shuts down its arcade division because of financial issues. All their top talent scatters. But just 2 months later, in May of '94, about 30 of these ex-Irem veterans regroup in Osaka. Backed by industry giant SNK, they form Nazca Corporation. They hit a massive wall in August 1995 with a failed location test, but miraculously, they managed to drop the final game by April 1996. Talk about a whirlwind. The crucial thing to remember here is that Nazca wasn't just some group of rookies. These were hardened arcade veterans. They brought over the DNA from the insanely detailed sprite-heavy shooters they'd already made, games like In the Hunt and Gun Force 2. SNK basically handed them a blank check creatively to push the Neo Geo hardware to its absolute breaking point. They set out to build their magnum opus, taking their signature, intense, strategic gameplay and wrapping it in just unparalleled mechanical animations. But, the road to a masterpiece is rarely smooth. Let's move to Section 2, the failed tank prototype, and the brutal crunch they had to endure to save a doomed vision. Believe it or not, the Metal Slug we all know and love today actually started as a completely different game. Internally, they called it Metal Slug Zero, and it was a vehicle-only shooter where you strictly played as a tank. So they take it out to arcades in Osaka for location testing in August 1995, and, well, it completely bombed. Players hated it. They found the tank way too bulky, too slow, and the pacing was just incredibly awkward for an action game. The team realized right then and there they had to pivot. They needed to ditch the sluggish tank focus and shift to a fast-paced run-and-gun with agile human soldiers. This quote from Kazuma Kujo, the game's planner, really highlights the absolute nightmare they were looking at. He noted, "Well, obviously the main character had to be recreated from being a tank to a soldier. The objects and enemies within the level had to be adjusted to match the new character. To save time, they had to keep the existing backgrounds they'd already drawn, but literally every single interaction, enemy placement, and level dimension had to be entirely reworked to fit a human protagonist." Because of this massive course correction, a project originally scheduled for 18 months got pushed back by a full 6 months. And to save the game, the roughly 20 developers working on it went into a brutal, grueling crunch. We're talking developers literally passing out from exhaustion at 2 or 3 in the morning, zipping themselves into sleeping bags right under their desks, only to wake up at 9 a.m. and do it all over again. Just a sheer, raw test of human endurance to keep their dream alive. But that exhaustion absolutely paid off, resulting in some really deliberate design choices. Let's step into Section 3, Run, Gun, and Survive, and break down these arcade mechanics. What's super interesting here are the rules that Nazca specifically chose to break. So in most run and guns, think Contra, you can aim diagonally, right? In Metal Slug, you can't. That was actually a highly intentional choice by Kujo to make the game feel more like a traditional flying shoot-'em-up. To make up for that restriction, they gave players these really generous, fluid jump physics. Oh, and my favorite rule, simply bumping into a standard enemy foot soldier won't kill you. Plus, they shower you with special weapons, which basically forces you to think strategically about your positioning and when to use your grenades, instead of just mindlessly spraying bullets everywhere. And, of course, we have to talk about the absolute star of the show, Super Vehicle 001, the Metal Slug itself. Even though they pivoted to human characters, they kept the tank in the game as this incredible power-up. It's a masterclass in game balance, honestly. The tank gives you this crazy firepower with an 8-way Vulcan cannon, and it can absorb 3 hits. But the trade-off? It's super clunky. The movement is lumbering, the jump range is terrible. It requires real finesse to master, especially because if you accidentally press shoot and jump at the same exact time, it triggers a devastating but totally suicidal kamikaze attack. Beyond just the mechanics, though, the game is defined by this incredible tonal duality. On one hand, you have these deeply gritty backgrounds, ruined cities, and a very genuine anti-war undertone. But then it's completely juxtaposed with absolute slapstick comedy. You catch enemy soldiers sunbathing, they scream in panic when you surprise them, and the character expressions are just ridiculously cartoonish. That levity is so crucial. It keeps the intense arcade action from feeling overly depressing and creates a vibe that's just unforgettable. So, how did they actually build this world? Let's move to our 4th section, Masters of Pixel Art, the 2D Rebellion, because this is where Nazca truly made history. The art team operated under a really strict philosophy with 3 main pillars. First up, the shaping, focusing heavily on creating instantly readable silhouettes. Second, the coloring, utilizing sober, somewhat muted palettes to keep that grounded military feel. And third, the shading and details. The big takeaway here is restraint. They deliberately kept facial shading highly minimal. Think about it. If you overshade a tiny pixelated face, it just turns into a muddy, blurry mess. By keeping it simple, the characters' exaggerated traits stayed crystal clear, even when the whole screen was shaking from explosions. Now take a second to appreciate this number. 10 plus. That is the amount of unique, hand-drawn death animations they created just for the basic standard enemy foot soldiers. Seriously, depending on whether an enemy gets shot, blown up, or caught in fire, you get a totally different animation. That level of obsessive variety was practically unheard of at the time. It really shows off the insane artisan-level craftsmanship this team had. But making all this beautiful art actually run without crashing the machine, that was a technical nightmare. Listen to this from programmer Atsushi Kuroka. There are empty spaces within the square pixels, so we would cut them to minimize the bounding number of sprites required to move the character. They were quite literally going into the code and manually optimizing the boundaries by hand, cutting out empty space pixel by pixel, just to stretch the hardware's memory far enough to handle the absolute chaos happening on screen. And that obsession extended straight into the environments. The art team was hyper-focused on micro details. For example, artist Takeshi Okui actually had to hand-draw the game's waterfalls sprite by sprite, piece by piece, because the old rudimentary tools they carried over from IREM didn't even support larger block-level animations. As you play, you'll notice parrots flying away from gunfire, pristine reflections in little water puddles, dynamic chunks of debris. It is a labor of love in literally every single frame. All of those sleepless nights bring us to our final section, a lasting 2D legacy, and the ultimate triumph of this Neo Geo classic. We really need to put this into historical context. In 1996, the industry was desperately chasing 3D. Developers were terrified that if they didn't jump on the primitive polygon bandwagon, they'd be left in the dust. Yet Nazca Corporation just stubbornly dug their heels in. They doubled down on traditional, meticulously hand-drawn 2D art. And guess what? They proved everyone wrong. They proved that beautifully crafted 2D could still completely dominate arcades, essentially acting as a lifeboat for the entire run-and-gun genre. The market absolutely rewarded them for it. When it dropped in the spring of 1996, Metal Slug was an instant, massive hit. In Europe alone, it sold 5,000 arcade copies in a single month. The success was so undeniable that SNK just went ahead and fully absorbed Nazca by October. From there, this one exhausting, delayed project sparked a legendary franchise, leading to sequels like Metal Slug 2, X, and the sprawling masterpiece that is Metal Slug 3. Even decades later, its jaw-dropping animation techniques continue to inspire modern indie developers working in high-fidelity pixel art. Which really leaves us with this final thought to chew on. In today's modern era of massive 3D game engines, automated developer tools, and AI generation, Will we ever again see a tight-knit 20-person team sleep in bags under their desks just to achieve this unparalleled level of handcrafted, micro-detailed 2D magic? I mean, it's a profound testament to human artistry and passion that you just can't easily replicate. Hey, do yourself a favor, go track down a copy of Metal Slug and see these pixels in motion for yourself.
The games you grew up with have stories worth telling. Subscribe to the Arcade Chronicle and join us.